Hello again, everybody. Here's the third installment on HTML and CSS. These are the refreshers on certain things that you ought to be able to do at this stage. But if you're still trying to figure out how a few things work, then this is going to give you a little bit of a heads up. This installment, what I want to do is give you a few more commands to use when you're using CSS to style your web page. And most importantly for this particular installment, this third installment, I'm going to show you how to take the CSS out of your HTML file and put it into its own file that you can use use as the separate style sheet for your HTML code. What I'm going to do first is quit Text Wrangler. Let's save everything. And okay, let me quit Text Wrangler and quit that. And the first thing you need to do when you're going to start having more than one individual page for your HTML for your website or web page, you'll recall this is what your web page looks like right now with embedded CSS. And again, the reason that we call it embedded is because all of the blocks of CSS code fall between these two, the opening and closing style tags that are also within the head section of your HTML file. What we're going to do is this. We're going to close out. We're going to take the CSS out of your HTML so it makes your HTML file more readable and clean. And we're going to put it into its own style sheet. First thing you have to do, though, when you have multiple documents that are referencing a particular web page or several pages of a website for that matter, you need a folder to contain all of the individual files that make up your web page or website. Now we need to just give this folder some obvious name. So we're just going to give it the name in lowercase letters. We're going to give it website 1. It doesn't matter what you call the folder, as long as whatever you call it, your files go inside of it. So here's website 1. Let me clean up my screen a little bit. Website 1 is going to go, my HTML file is going to go inside this folder. Now, let's go ahead and open Hello World in Text Wrangler, which is my favorite text editor. Make the screen a tiny bit smaller. Now, embedding your CSS in your HTML file is a good idea if you don't have that much CSS code, or if it's a very small web page. This would be fine. But let's say that you're going to create a much bigger web page, or you're going to add a heck of a lot more CSS code to give your web page a lot more style, or your website. You say you have 12 pages to your website, you're probably going to have a good portion of CSS code. So what we need to do is move the style out of the CSS styling out of your HTML file. And all I'm going to do is highlight everything that's CSS related and cut. Okay, then what I'm going to do is create a new text document, and I'm going to paste my CSS into it and get rid of the style tags. In an external style sheet like this one, which is what we're creating, in an external style sheet you do not need to have a header of any sort. The new style sheet simply has your CSS code in it. And then you want to name it something, again, something pretty easy for you to remember. And I usually just name all of my style sheets styles, and then give it the extension CSS. So give it a name like styles.css. and then let's save it to the desktop first. And then once you've saved it into the desktop, save it into your Website 1 folder. So now everything is in the same folder. Now, let's open up Styles again in Text Wrangler and just bring it over here to the side. Let's close that drawer. Now, the question then becomes, how do I get my HTML file to see and read my CSS file? Well, what you do is in the head of your HTML file, you type in a link that tells your browser where to look for the style sheet. And so we type in open bracket link space rel equals open quote style sheet, and it's going to be space type equals text /CSS, and don't forget your open and close quotes, space href equals open quote styles.css, close quote, and the last thing you need to put in is media equals all, and then close bracket. And don't forget to put your open and close quotes in the appropriate place. Now, media all means that no matter what type of media is inside of your that you're attempting to style, this style sheet will represent all of it. And so you can there are other commands that you can put in here. Instead of all, you could just say print, which would work for our purposes, print, or you could type in media, excuse me, not media, but screen, which means that if there's video or whatnot, then you're trying to style all of this style sheet is trying to style all of the elements related to the video. But for our purposes, all always works on everything. I don't know why we don't always just use that. And save. Okay, now that you've saved it, let's take a look at what we've done so far again. We have taken all of the CSS code out of our HTML file. It's not there anymore. We have put it in a separate file, taken out the style tags, put all of just our CSS code into a separate file that we named styles.css. Then what we did is we linked our HTML file in the head of the file to your styles.css file. And now this line of code is going to tell this page to look for this to tell us how to make that look. Okay? Then if we want to test it, all we have to do is double click or drag our HTML file to our window, and there it is. Now here, let me show you what happens. Let me show you what happens when we break the link. I'm going to use the HTML comment command to get rid of the link to the style sheet, just so that you can see what happens when we get rid of that link. Okay, now our browser won't be able to tell where the style sheet is, and so when we refresh our page, it goes back to that original styling that you saw all the way back in lesson 2. But we don't want that to happen. We want to get rid of the commenting out. Okay, and save, and then refresh. And so that's how you know that this file is reading this file to show you what's happening on this page in the actual browser window. Now let's take a look at a couple of other things. Let me clean up my window so that I can actually see things when I need to get at them. Let's make that a little bit shorter for now. Okay. Now, what I would like to do is change the look of this a little bit more with a few extra bits of CSS code and give you a sense of how you can change things and how you can play around and manipulate things using a variety of different selectors and properties and values to help you out. So within the block of code that we already have, and you can have as many blocks of code as you need. You can have as many IDs, you can have as many classes which function very much like an ID in order to help you format your web page. But within what we have already, what I would like to do first is to define the kind of font I actually want to show up here. And the way to do that is not in the HTML file, but actually here. And what I want the font to look exactly the same in all of my paragraphs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my selector the P tag, open and close curly bracket. And so in every instance of a paragraph that has been marked, what I want to do is add font family. And there are as many font families as there are font styles in your computer. Not every computer has every font style, but these are all what I'm going to show you are considered web-safe fonts. That is, just about every computer on the planet has these fonts already installed on it. So in other words, your web browser actually can't show us a font that isn't actually installed in the computer. So if you, for instance, if your computer doesn't have the Arial font installed on it, you can't show an Arial in your web page. And there are ways around that problem by referencing Stylesheets online, but we'll get to that at a later date. But for right now, for web-safe fonts, I'm going to style this page, our page, with Book Antiqua. And let's see here, Book Antiqua, semicolon. And let's see, and also, no, let's just stick with Book Antiqua for now. So instead of this, we're going to go with Book Antiqua. So save, and there we go. Our font just changed to Book Antiqua. I like that font a lot better. Now, what if I wanted to change the size of the font? Now that's another thing that we might want to do. So in order to change the font size, we could also say font size is, let's say, 1 EM. And EM is a unit of measurement. EMs I prefer to use because they're adjustable to ebook readers, as well as the computer screen. And so I like using that better than pixels. But you can use font size, certain number of pixels, or font size percentage points. But I prefer to use EMs, and you can look that up in your handbook if you want to, your pocket reference, if you want to figure out what that means. So let's go with 1 EM and save. Did I just save that? Yeah, let's go with 1 EM. For every instance of P, we're going to have a font size of 1 EM, which is exactly the size that it is right now. But what if I want it bigger? Well, let's see what happens when I make the font size 2 EMs. Wow, that's a really big font. But you could see how this could be a really useful command when you're formatting your text. Okay, so let's take it back to 1.3 EMs, because you can always adjust it up and down in increments as well, your font size. Okay, there, that's a little bit better. But in actuality, all of those are too big, and what I want to do is make it actually smaller than the default, and I'm going to do 0.8 EMs. So smaller than the usual default font size. Okay, there we go. Slightly smaller, it fits our screen. It's not easy to read, but yeah, maybe there's a reason for you to have very small font like that, such as footnotes or some other stylistic thing that you're trying to accomplish. Now, you don't have to change the size of course, all of the fonts in P, in every instance of P. For instance, you could set it as every instance of P, make it font size 0.8 EM, but what if I wanted to emphasize my middle paragraph? Let's say font size 1.2 EMs, semicolon. Let's save, then refresh, and there we go. So now we have, because, let me explain what happened. Even though your default font size is always going to be 0.8 EM for every instance of P, because you have a named paragraph with the ID of para2, you can set just that paragraph's font size to slightly larger at 1.2 EM and get this effect. Now, let's go back. I want you to be able to see everything on the screen and try another command. And let's say that we want to center this particular paragraph. We want to move it so that it's centered inside the browser window. What do we need to do that? We're going to look at that center one. Para2 is what we're looking at. So ID para2. What we're going to do is we're going to set the margins. This is one way to do it. There's more than one way to do anything with CSS, and this is one way in this simple instance to move this paragraph over so that it is centered within the browser window. And the way to do that, you need two commands: margin left and margin right. And for both instances of margin left and margin right, you need to set it at auto. And don't forget your semicolon between each line of command. Now what's going to happen is that I'm setting the margin on the left and right side of this paragraph, this block of text. I'm setting the left and right margins to auto. What that tells the browser is to automatically push push the margin out a certain number of pixels. And if both are set at auto, they're going to even out. They're going to cancel each other out and put everything in the middle. Did I save? Save. Left margin, right margin. Save. And there we go. And so they moved this over so that now it's following your browser window around. It wants to default over there. Okay, so let's see. That doesn't really do what I want it to do. It's interesting, but what if we wanted to do something a little bit different? Oops, I'm sorry. I just noticed a mistake there. Margin left and margin right. We all make mistakes in our code. And then auto. There we go. Now we have it centered in our browser window. The code cancels itself out and it's going to move around, slide between those other two as you go along. But what if you want it to stay in one place? Let's use the position absolute command and then say from top 100 pixels and from the left, let's say 200 pixels. Don't forget your semicolons. So what we're doing now is, and let me separate this out a little bit, from position absolute, this line of code tells us we're going to put this particular block of text in one position. It's going to be absolute. No matter what size you make your browser window, it's going to stay in the spot that we define next. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say from the top left-hand corner of your browser window, we're going to move down 100 pixels and to the left 200 pixels. So let's save that and see what that does. There we go. What it does is it pushes your text box here to exactly where you defined it, but it also, what it did is it took your box here out of the flow of all of this. And so these two boxes of text want to go behind the absolutely positioned block of text. Okay, does that make sense there? A little bit. Let's clean this up a little bit by doing the same thing to the other paragraphs, but we're going to position them absolutely in different places. So from the top, we're going to leave the other one at top 100, but we're going to move it to the left 500 pixels. Oops, 500 pixels. And for paragraph 3, we're going to position it absolutely and from the top 300 pixels, but leave it at left 200 pixels. So now all 3 of our paragraphs are going to be positioned in one place and one place only, and that's from the top 100 pixels or 300 pixels, and from the left side to 500, 200, and 200 pixels. There we go. And you see how they overlap. Now what we want to do here is we want to experiment with the various bits of code to try and figure out exactly where we want everything to be. Well, we know that the top one is overlapping. You can't read that. So what we're going to do is we're going to push each one of these down a little bit. Let's say 380 for the bottom paragraph, to push it down a little bit more. Paragraph 2, let's move it. Let's leave it where it is, and then no, let's move it down. Let's move it down 200, and let's move this one left. Move it back 300 a little bit. Okay, now we're starting to get somewhere. You'll notice that no matter what size the browser window is, everything stays right where you put it. So let's fiddle with them again. Let's take the paragraph 1 and move it 20 pixels from the top and only 200 pixels from the left side of the screen. And let's push the third paragraph down to 400 pixels total. Let's save and see what it looks like in our screen. Okay, a little bit better. The top one, let's just make it 0. And so a lot of coding is oftentimes fiddling around with things until you get them to look exactly the way that you want them to, depending on the number of pixels. With time, you get a little bit accustomed to it, and let's make that 170. You get accustomed to the idea of how many pixels will move your text boxes, however much space, and these effects come a little bit quicker. And so again, you can see how we were able to move things around using a few more commands in CSS. Now, again, this is very basic CSS, and what we're going to do is I'm going to do a 4th installation of this tutorial. And I'm going to show you some more things that you can do with formatting using CSS to format just what we've already created using HTML, just pure HTML here, and CSS to make it move things around, make things look interesting, and reformat things to create a website that's elegant but has the look that you want it to look like. We'll probably play around with images a little bit next time, and so you can look out for the 4th installment. This was the 3rd installment of HTML and CSS, and I will talk to you again very soon.